Hello, how are you? Welcome to At Home on InViewTV. I'm William Brougham in Sydney. It's estimated that over 1 million Australians are living with an eating disorder. Less than a quarter of those are receiving support or treatment. On today's edition of At Home on InViewTV, we're going to be discussing the issues of body image and eating disorders. And in a moment, we'll have a guest, the National Helpline Manager of the Butterfly Foundation and psychologist Juliette Thomson. But first, let's find out a bit more about the valuable work of the Butterfly Foundation.
It got to the point where I just couldn't stop.
Whatever it took, I was so desperate to change.
I was so embarrassed. I never told anyone.
It made me push away the people I love.
My thinking went haywire. I became terrified to eat anything.
It became a cycle that took over my life.
Eating disorders are a choice.
Eating disorders are just dating.
Eating disorders are a bid for
People with
attention.
eating disorders are self-centered and
Bad
then
parenting is responsible for eating disorders.
Only middle-class white girls get eating disorders.
Butterfly's helpline gave me support in a safe and accepting space.
Butterfly worked with my school, so my teachers were able to understand and help me.
the information on Butterfly's website helped my doctor to understand my condition.
My support group helped me to realize recovery is possible.
I realised I wasn't alone.
Recovery is a journey, but talking helps.
At Butterfly, we're here for you, whoever you are and wherever you're at. So let's talk. Call our national helpline on 1-800-ED-HOPE or visit us online at butterfly.org.au.
Well, joining us is psychologist and National Helpline Manager of the Butterfly Foundation, Juliette Thomson. Juliette, welcome to the programme.
It's great to be here.
Now, when we talk about an eating disorder, what exactly are we talking about?
Sure. So eating disorders are a type of mental disorder or illness that's classified in the DSM, or the go-to manual of health clinicians, mental health clinicians in diagnosis. And there are several types of eating disorders. For instance, your viewers may have definitely heard of anorexia. There's also bulimia, binge eating disorder, and others. So they're just a few. And those those classifications have similarities and differences, but I think broadly speaking, we can think about eating disorders being on a spectrum, from disordered eating right through to a clinical diagnosis.
Now, what triggers an eating disorder? Do we know?
Look, the triggers of eating disorders are incredibly complex and they can be different for everybody. But what we know from research is that common factors the factors that tend to come about for predisposing someone is genetic vulnerability. So that's when eating disorders are carried down in families. Psychological factors, so the way that people tend to naturally think and their personality, as well as cultural influences. And we know that some factors that cause eating disorders are modifiable and some aren't, like being genetically vulnerable. So some of the more modifiable factors are things like low self-esteem, body dissatisfaction, internalisation of our thin sociocultural ideal, and extreme weight loss behaviours.
Now, the fixation and obsession with body image, is that something relatively recent, do you think?
In some ways, yes, but what we know is that eating disorders and types of eating disorders have been around for a very, very long time, and we see that in literature. But what may be happening now is that we're getting better at understanding eating disorders and how they arise and how they play out for people, so we can get better at diagnosing them. And there may be an element of the current culture, the thin ideal internalisation may influence the rise in eating disorders, but it's not quite clear, it's not quite known exactly if they have naturally increased or if we're just better at identifying them.
Over 1 million Australians are estimated to be living with an eating disorder. Why the large numbers?
Well, look, I think it can be really shocking to hear that huge amount, that huge figure. And I think it comes back to what I was mentioning earlier about a spectrum. And a spectrum is lots of grades of shades of grey. And down one end you have broadly what's considered healthy eating and body image, and at the other end, clinical eating disorders. And it is very, very common for people to be right across that spectrum. So I think as a society, though, we're not yet able to see people in the middle of that spectrum as needing help. It's almost accepted to some degree to be struggling with your body and your eating, and that's something that we really want to change.
During COVID, I found that my social media, Facebook, for instance, Instagram, has been bombarded with adverts to join gyms, to go on fad diets. Do you think and to what extent do you think we're being guilted into suddenly looking at our body image and losing weight?
Look, I think that gyms and the weight loss industry, or gyms that partake in that weight loss message, unfortunately are putting people who are at risk of developing an eating disorder at risk. And so I think whether it be now or at any other time, really important that industry understands that weight loss, that broad weight loss message can be incredibly damaging for so many people, and that what we really need to move to is a health messaging. This idea of when you move, generally for many people, you feel better, and it actually has little about weight loss, etc.
Now, you've talked about gyms. What about us as people? I mean, I've been out before and I've met a friend, and one of the first things they've said is, oh, look at you, you've put on weight. How can we change our own language in terms of body image and when we're approaching others?
Great question. And being aware is the first step in that. I think there is a lot of, there's people out there who don't understand what we were talking about earlier, that so many people, and people that you wouldn't necessarily think of having eating disorders. So there's a myth that it's only middle-class white females that experience eating disorders, and that's just simply not true. We know that eating disorders can affect everybody. If you're human, it can affect you. So once we understand that that is a myth, then I think the second part of understanding is knowing that type of conversation and that type of language can be really damaging for individuals. So I think when people realise that, they're much less likely to engage in that kind of conversation. But it takes that question, basically, and for your viewers to hear that question, to understand that there's something not right in that question that can do a lot of damage.
Now, you talked about the stereotype of white middle-class schoolgirls having an eating disorder, and certainly growing up, that's the image I had. It was always young women, teenagers. Why do you think that stereotype came about?
Yeah, look, that's another great question. I think, I'm not sure of the quick answer to that. I don't know why that has emerged, but I suspect that it has something to do with levels of shame and stigmatization. We know that men and people of colour, people of diverse genders and backgrounds have always experienced eating disorders, disordered eating and body image issues, but perhaps there wasn't the support to come forward and to speak their truth.
How can we recognise an eating disorder within ourselves and others?
Look, when I mentioned before the factors that contribute to the development of an eating disorder, I said that they're complex, and they're also can be very different for individuals. They play out differently. So your best friend that might struggle with eating or an eating disorder, that experience might be totally different to your own. And so in terms of identifying, there's not, there's not this set of 6 that must happen for someone to be experiencing. So that's why, broadly speaking, I'll say that if you find yourself feeling stressed and anxious about food, weight, or shape, and that's taking up a lot of your time in your mind, or you're feeling very significant feelings of distress, or someone has commented to you that they've noticed that that's causing you distress, that's a broad sign to say that something might not quite be right. It might not be that what you're experiencing falls into that clinical category of eating disorder, but it might be disordered eating. And any type of struggle with eating, weight or shape or body image deserves support and intervention. So I just want to share that with your viewers and yourself, that there's a common myth people feel when they struggle of, oh, I'm not bad enough, or I'm not sick enough. And I want to really hone in on that and say that's not true. Even if you'd like your eating to be, it's fine, but you'd like it to be, you'd like to have a better relationship with food or your body, still reach out, because people are there ready to support you.
Now, we talked about that stereotype earlier of the white woman. To what extent is there a difference between men and women in terms of numbers of eating disorders?
Another figure that might surprise your audience is that 36% of men in their lifetime will experience an eating disorder. So much higher than people might think. And broadly speaking, we know that binge eating disorder is the eating disorder that's most commonly experienced by males. So I think, we have to understand that men do experience eating disorders, and that can play out a little bit different for females, or it can play out exactly the same. But they certainly happen for men and people of any gender.
To what extent do you find that men are more afraid or more reluctant to come forward, say, than women?
Again, the stereotype and the stigmatization and that myth has played a big role, unfortunately, in preventing people who feel they shouldn't have an eating disorder for whatever reason come forward. So yeah, I think it's played a huge role. But the good news of this is that I think we're just starting to have broadly in our society that the conversations, for instance, you just asked me that question now, is pointing to the fact that we're ready to start having this inclusivity conversation. And if you look at some of our new resources and videos, they'll heavily represent people of all backgrounds and experiences.
At the beginning of this interview, we saw a 2-minute video about the Butterfly Foundation and the crucial and great and important work that it does. Can you tell us a bit about some of the services that the Butterfly Foundation offers, please?
Not a problem. So we try and provide innovative services that meet the current demands, with the idea of broadening that out and handing that over when we can, and advocating for anyone impacted by an eating disorder or body image issue. So specifically, some of the ones that we offer is prevention services, which is going into schools and offering education and training for both teachers, parents, as well as body image type training for children. We also have our helpline, and that helpline is open 7 days a week, 8 a.m. till midnight, staffed by professional eating disorder health professionals. And that line is there for anyone who'd like to call, email, text, web chat, for information, referrals, brief counselling. We also have treatment and support services, so running support groups across the country, as well as online, as well as more increased intervention programs, so virtual intensive outpatient programs for youth and adult, as well as face-to-face. But as you can imagine with COVID, that has changed that face-to-face for the meantime.
Talking of COVID, have you found that more people have come forward with concerns about body image and eating disorders?
Yeah, unfortunately we have. We've had a huge spike in contacts. For instance, it's 116% increase in our web chats from March to May, which is huge. So, and across our service, from January to June, we experienced an almost 30% increase across the whole service. So unfortunately we have, and we've also noticed more recently a big spike from people from Victoria, for obvious reasons.
Now, we mentioned a helpline. That number is 1800 33 4673, 1800 33 4673, and we'll have that number in the description for the video as well. Now, when people contact Juliette, the Butterfly Foundation, what sort of issues are they most concerned about?
We speak to such a variety of people that there's really a lot of different type of things that we hear and that we support. So by no means is there very dominant questions, but I guess you can put it into the broad categories of people reaching out for information, whether it be a person caring for someone, or they themselves just reaching out and saying, hey, I just want to know more. What is bulimia? What does that look like? How does someone develop that? Right through to somebody who feels that they could be experiencing an eating disorder or issues like that, or have been asked by a friend or family member to reach out. So people saying, look, I'm not really sure that I've got anything wrong, something's going on for me, but it might be, can I have a chat about that and explore whether this might be happening for me? Right through to people in carers, people experiencing in carers that have lived with an eating disorder in their lives for a long time and really benefit from that ongoing support, particularly in between treatment sessions. So there's some broad types of people and things that they come to us for, but I've got to say there's 101 other things that people come to us for within that.
A couple of weeks ago, there was an episode of Drag Race Canada, and they had a model on who was what we call plus size, and there were news articles about him, etc. Do you think this is a good thing because it encourages people to be themselves, or do you think we need to get to a stage where it doesn't make news anymore?
Great question. I certainly don't think we're at that stage where it doesn't make news anymore. Of course, we advocate here for people to be happy, healthy and free in whatever body shape and size that they have. And I think if we get to a place in our society where it's not news anymore, that's wonderful, but we're not there yet. And where I think we're at the beginning of that conversation again, saying actually you can have health at any size body that you have, and trying to break down that myth that you have to be a certain size to be healthy, and that also not just healthy, but beautiful, thriving, handsome, whatever words you want to use that have been typically ascribed to those in a particular body size applies to everybody. And that's also important, not to say that pit one body against another. It's all everybody is literally valued, has something to, that functions for us. So I think, there's a lot more conversation and understanding we have to have around that concept.
Now, in discussing body image, what are the main issues that people come forward with to the Butterfly Foundation?
It's not, you'd be surprised perhaps to hear that it's not just people living in larger bodies that might come forward and say, hey, I feel pressured by a thin ideal or whatnot. It's people of all bodies. And that's what I think as a society we haven't grasped yet. You can have what others would consider, a small body and still struggle with body image and still feel that it's not good enough or it needs to be different. So when people come to us for support, it really is this idea of a person coming to terms with their body, whatever shape and size it is.
How can we change our way of thinking if we have an eating disorder or an issue with our body image? For instance, myself, I'm always worried about what I'm eating. If I eat chocolate, I feel I've got to go on a run or do exercise. Is there a simple way, and I'm sure there's nothing simple about it, but is there a way, an effective way, we can change our outlook?
You're right, it's not simple. And that's what makes this area so complex and challenging. And there's a risk when I answer this question of sounding trite, and I'm aware of that, and I don't mean to sound trite. I actually mean to say, I mean what I say when I say that having a healthy relationship with food and body is completely possible. Difficult to get to and a challenge, but it actually is completely possible, and recovery from an eating disorder is completely possible. There's a whole lot that has to happen before someone gets to that stage. And the first is realizing that you're not alone, that there are other people, not only that are going through similar things, many more than people realize, but also that there is professionals and people out there who have the skills to support and help. So I'm not promising that journey is easy to recovery or it's straightforward in a straight line. It kind of often the line goes up like this and goes and then out the other side. But it is possible, and reaching out to resources, both information and support, that have the skills. And that in itself is the first hurdle. So you might connect with a support person that doesn't click with you, and you'll have to try and connect with another one. And that's one of the first hurdles of recovery or having a healthier body image, is to connect and persist with the right resources that might take a few goes first. And it might be that an individual has to trial and persist with different ways of coming at the issue. But it's worth it. It really is, once you get to a point where you're free in your relationship with your body and food.
Fantastic. Now, what I'd like to know is, if we have a friend or a close family member who we suspect or know has an eating disorder, has an issue with food and what they eat and their weight, etc., how can we approach them sensitively to actually talk about it? Or is it indeed our place?
Again, a complicated answer. And just for your viewers, the helpline is there to give you specific advice for your situation around this. So don't hesitate to give us, to reach out. Again, we're heavily got a lot of traffic coming at the moment, but we will always get back to you if you leave a message or send an email. But generally speaking, I think that it can be our place to say, hey, I'm worried about you and I want to support you. And that's very different to saying, you have a problem, you need to get over it, go and get help. So what underpins it is a genuine compassion and concern and genuine curiosity. So when you say, you might say, oh, hey, I'm actually really worried about you because I've seen A, B, and C. Are you okay? And being able to sit with whatever response comes back, because we know that those experiencing eating disorders it's very hard to reach out for help, and it's very hard at times to fully have clarity on the issue. So the response might be, no, I'm fine. Stop pressuring me. You know, that doesn't mean we need to give up or that person is fine. But we can say, okay, all right, I hear what you say. I still am concerned because I've seen this, this, and this. I want you to know that I'm here for you if you want to talk, or I'm here to walk this with you, and let me know if you want me to gather up some resources for you. So does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Now, about 17 years ago in 2003, I made a very short radio documentary back in England about eating disorders. And one of the things that I looked at was the images of people presented in magazines, you know, models. 17 years later, all these years later, I'm still seeing those very similar images. What role does the media play in terms of the images presented?
I think it's probably a broader conversation. I don't think that we have too much to gain from honing in on one section of society and blaming them for all eating disorders, although it's tempting at times. I think what we will be better served doing is zooming out and saying, what role as a society do we play, do I play in the persistent use of these images? So have I spoken up to my family and friends about how I'm not okay with that and I wish it could change? So all taking responsibility for the fact that if we persist with saying that a certain image is the most desirable, none of us are going to benefit. And I think we actually are seeing that in media campaigns and organisation and commercial campaigns much more commonly. Do you see people of diverse, not just body shapes, but backgrounds, genders, sexual orientations, whatever, the diversity coming forward and having a voice? We're seeing that much more.
So do you think there's any groups of people in particular who are more susceptible to eating disorders?
There certainly is. And people who are in particularly vulnerable groups can be more at risk. So that is those who have experienced trauma and difficult situations in their life, or come from a community that's perhaps persecuted or a minority. And more generally, we know that women and young women do tend to experience eating disorders at a higher rate, and that's not to cancel out the fact that everybody can experience them, but they do tend to experience it at a little bit of a higher rate. So women going through life transitions, whether it be puberty, having a baby, body changes, menopause, that's going to put someone more at risk. And the same goes for men at their different life changes and stages broadly.
You hinted at it earlier in the interview, but do we ever truly recover from an eating disorder? Is it possible? Is that it?
Yes, there is. There is hope, and you can, and I've seen it so many times. I've been in this work for a while now, and I can tell you from experience, it's yes. That's not to say that it's not really hard for most people. And along that recovery journey, there can be a time where someone recovers from the behaviours and their body weight stabilised, if that's what was happening for them, but they still have thoughts, eating disorder thoughts, that they might not act on, or they might increase in times of stress. That's actually normal as a part of recovery. So, and I think it's, for people who have been through that stage, it's tempting to say, well, you never get over it, you'll always have it. And maybe for some people, that's the point of recovery that they want to get to, or they can get to for themselves in their life. But it is possible to go further. And it's also possible to recover from an eating disorder at any time. So whether you're 75 years old, you can still recover.
That's really hopeful news and very positive. Juliette, is there any final piece of advice or message you'd like to share with our viewers?
I think we've touched on some really good points around the fact that recovery is possible and that eating disorders can happen to anyone in different ways. So I think it's really important for people to know that you're not alone, and there are services like the helpline that you can access. Maybe not get an immediate response, but we will get back to you. And we've got people on that line that can connect and understand and provide a little bit of guidance for you. So there is hope. And if that is not where you're at and you don't want to reach out, that's absolutely fine. Have a go at talking to some family and friends and see what happens.
Juliette Thomson from the Butterfly Foundation, thank you so much for joining us here on At Home on InViewTV. Best of luck. We'll also share all the helpline details after this interview, but best of luck with the Butterfly Foundation, and thank you for your valuable time.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Now, if you'd like more information about eating disorders or body image, you can contact the Butterfly organisation and the Butterfly Foundation at support@butterfly.org.au. support@butterfly.org.au. You can also phone them on 1800 33 4673. 1800 33 4673. And their website, butterfly.org.au. butterfly.org.au. We'll also have all the details in our written description to this video. Thank you so much for joining us here on At Home on InViewTV. I want to thank Juliette Thomson from the Butterfly Foundation for joining us this week, and of course my executive producer Bruce Mott. Please join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on OvoPlay, YouTube and Facebook for more episodes and more fantastic guests and topics here on At Home on InViewTV. In the meantime, have a fantastic week and an even better weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.